in a world when we think about where there's been a real shift about how we think about capitalism in the past 4 years, and both of your enterprises at some level are about either making a profit or using the profit incentive to make your businesses grow or to make your enterprises grow. How do you think about that? How do you go to countries that have looked at our version of capitalism here in the US and say, you know what, we just watched what happened here, and this may not work the way we thought? I'm going to start with you, Linda.
Well, your question, and also about patience, really gets to the heart of Endeavor's model. So in the mid-1990s, I was living in Latin America. I had fled from Yale Law School knowing only that I was never practicing the law. And I was struck by how many young people aspired to government jobs. I didn't understand this. And how many taxi drivers had PhDs in engineering. So I kept asking, why is no one starting a business? And it was explained to me that in Latin America and other emerging markets, if you weren't from one of the top 10 families, there was no way that you could start a company. No one would give you support. There were no role models, no venture capitalists, no mentors. And that also, they were seen as greedy and corrupt, so why would you aspire to do that anyway? I said, no, I'm talking about entrepreneurs, people who innovate, create jobs. And I'd use the story of Apple Computer, and people would say, nice story, but guys like me, we don't even have a garage. So Endeavor was really set up to address this issue. And what we said was, just like you said, if we wanted to be impatient, we would start a venture fund and invest in 3 of these companies. But we wanted to build an ecosystem. So we said, we're going to do something non-traditional. We're going to set up as a nonprofit that's of, by, and for entrepreneurs. And not just any entrepreneurs, the high-impact ones, the ones with the greatest potential to scale, create jobs, create revenues. And we said, if we do our job right, these entrepreneurs will not only change the way business is done in their societies, but they'll give back and make us self-sustaining. Everyone said I was crazy. I was literally the chica loca in Latin America. And here's where we are today. It's 15 years later. Endeavor operates in 17 countries in Latin America, the Middle East, Europe, Asia, and Africa. We've screened 30,000 entrepreneurs, certified 722 from 450 companies. Once they become Endeavor entrepreneurs, we help them build business plans, build advisory boards, access capital, in some cases fire their mother-in-law. And last year, they generated $5 billion in revenues and 200,000 jobs. But here's the more important thing. They're now becoming the mentors. They're now becoming the angel investors. And so in fact, one of my favorite days at Endeavor was you were down in Brazil. The editor of the Portuguese dictionary came to us and said, because of our work, they were going to add the term empreendedor into the language. So now there's something that people can aspire to that has a positive connotation.
And you're investing, I mean, one of the things that's so interesting to me is you're now investing in businesses that you hope will turn a profit.
Yeah.
You're hoping that they'll have an IPO, and you're trying to take that profit, turn around, and then invest in other emerging businesses.
Yes, my colleague Bailey Kempner is here. We started something called Endeavor Catalyst that's actually acting as an endowment, so it's taking donor capital. We talk about return on donated capital, RODC. And the idea is we're co-investing in our entrepreneurs, raising $5 million from venture capitalists, and that we'll use the returns to make Endeavor sustainable and to go to the next countries where they don't yet have an entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Okay, Lila, take us through what you do, because it's pretty crazy and pretty interesting.
Sure, and just to tell you how I got started, when I was 17, I got a scholarship from a tobacco company, from the Lorillard Tobacco Company, and I decided to use it to go and volunteer in Africa. So I went to Ghana in West Africa. I was assigned to this small school in a little village, and I thought I was going to go there and save the world. And yet my students were incredibly bright. They spoke beautiful English. They could tell me the name of US senators, which, by the way, some of my high school classmates couldn't tell me. And I thought, this is the great untold story of poverty and development. There is a mass of untapped human potential. I think Linda's organization does a great job of addressing that. So I studied development. I wasn't really thrilled with what I saw in the traditional aid model, which is essentially that we view poor people as these passive recipients of handouts, and we don't really give them any credit. So I formed an organization called Samasource. Sama means equal in Sanskrit, and we connect some of the world's poorest people, people living on less than $3 a day, to work via the internet. And this is a really interesting business model that's only made possible by some of the recent advancements in the last 5 years in internet connectivity and, thanks to Moore's Law, really cheap computing devices all over the world. There's one that launched last year that's $25, the Raspberry Pi. So we've taken advantage of this new infrastructure and this new connectivity to take people who are living at the bottom, 4 billion on less than $3 a day, and connect them to what we call micro work. So we divide up big digital projects, which are typically outsourced, like image tagging, like transcription, like captioning videos, and we send that work to people living in slums and villages in poor parts of East Africa, South Asia, and Haiti. And to date, we started 4 years ago. We've paid out 3,000 people, so 3,000 women and youth who had never had formal work experience before, have actually made this money doing real work for companies like eBay. We've paid out 3,000 women and youth, and we've also paid them over $2.5 million in real revenue from for-profit companies. And I think what's so interesting about this new world that we live in is that people are starting to realize that capitalism and charity don't have to be this dichotomy that's existed for so long. And people really want to embed the meaning that they find in their charitable work on weekends and evenings and in the latter half of their lives into their businesses.
So, for example, if I am living, I don't know where, you come to me and you say, you're going to train me to tag photos? Is that how this works?
It's a little different than that. If we did that, probably no one would want to work with us. So we work with local recruiting partners. The work can be a little bit boring, but here's how we do it. So we work with local NGOs that operate in slums and villages that do things like training people in leadership skills or teaching them how to save money. And those organizations become feeders for us, and they send people to our local partners. We have a network of 16, some for-profit, some nonprofit entrepreneurs that operate existing computer businesses, internet cafes, computer centers in developing countries. And these people then, as an agreement with Samasource, hire poor people to do the work in exchange for us sending them the contracts that they wouldn't be able to have access to in developed countries.
Okay, so here's the question. Google is a client, if you will, or a partner, right? Microsoft is a partner. Do they work with you so they can check off a box that says social responsibility or social mission or something? Or do they work with you because ultimately they're getting a good value for what you're actually doing?
So this is a great question. At the beginning, my hypothesis was that businesses would behave like consumers do. Consumers, in many cases, are willing to pay a premium for socially labeled goods. Businesses, as I learned after starting my business, are not. Businesses pay us to deliver good quality services with competitive costs and competitive turnaround times, and we're competing with for-profit outsourcing firms. So what we found is that the social mission is really the icing on the cake. The good quality services have to be there first, and then all other things being equal, of course, people would love to work with us. They know that we're a nonprofit.
If you succeed, what happens when an entire village is tagging photos and doing all sorts of things, realizes I can be an entrepreneur, and they get involved with you? The price, by the way, all of a sudden goes up for you. So Google says, I don't know, can I use you, or do you consider that success?
Yeah, but success is a good thing. I mean, look, in our case, we're seeing these tech and other entrepreneurial ecosystems spawn up in Buenos Aires, in Amman, in places you would never, in Egypt after the revolution, in Greece now. These are places you wouldn't expect business to be happening.
You just started in Greece.
We just started in Greece, yes.
Very strange place,
place
to start, given what's going on in the world.
I know, you called me crazy again, and I said that when economies turn down, entrepreneurs look up. It's the best time to be an entrepreneur in Greece. Chaos is a catalyst. Chaos is your friend. But what's interesting is when we looked, so we went to Argentina, Jordan, Turkey, Brazil. We said, all right, we want to investigate all these startups that are happening. Why? So we looked to the 200 startup companies, too early for Endeavor. We take companies, $1 to $20 million in revenues. But we asked them 4 questions. We said, number 1, who inspired you? Number 2, who mentored you? Number 3, who, if anybody, actually invested in you? And number 4, did you ever work for an entrepreneurial firm before? Now, 15 years ago, there was no Word, there was no company, there were no role models. What happened is they'd start referring back to the companies, and we started seeing patterns. And 3 or 4 companies, some of our ex-entrepreneurs, have become the angel investors, the mentors, the venture capitalists, and you take them away, the ecosystem disappears. But what happens is, it's like the PayPal Mafia effect or the Googlers. You can have a few entrepreneurs paying it forward. It creates the next generation. It's a multiplier effect that happens very rapidly. So what you're doing at Samasource, we hope they will be the one-day entrepreneurs. We hope ours become the VCs. That's success.
And I have a great story. I just wanted to show you an actual worker. If we can bring up the slide, just to show you how this ecosystem works. So this is a woman named Jacqueline Inthania. She's 25 years old. She's from rural Kenya. She's from a country where the vast majority of people make less than $2 a day. And that's, by the way, adjusted for purchasing power. So that's what $2 would buy you in the US in 2005. That's where she lives. And yet 95% of people under 30 in Kenya can read and write in English, and she's one of them. So Jacqueline came to us, and then this next slide shows you what she's doing now. She came to us. She had never had formal work experience before. She had to drop out of school because she didn't have enough money to afford the school fees, and she got this job at one of our computer centers in Nairobi about a year and a half ago. She made enough money to pay her rent, her single mom's rent, and put herself and her sister through school. That's how much more money you can make doing computer-based work than doing basic informal employment. And then she left. And actually, the ideal scenario is for us, is for our workers to leave after 6 months or a year and earn higher paying work in the for-profit private sector, because then we're not using nonprofit funds to subsidize people forever. And so I hope that someday she becomes an entrepreneur and works with Endeavor.
Actually, one of my favorite stories also grew up in the favelas, the slums of Rio. And her mom was a maid and her father was a janitor, and she got a job at McDonald's and said, you know what? Why can't I do this franchising thing but for poor people? Why can't poor people feel beautiful? So she and her cousin Zika started something called Beleza Natural hair salons. We found her when she had 2 salons, and you think, oh, that's a nice story. They'd actually concocted this product in their kitchen, tested it on their husbands. The husband's hair fell out. But we found them, and there were like 4-hour and 6-hour waits at the salons, and we helped them understand franchising, get mentors. Today, Beleza Natural is a $75 million business. They employ 1,500, mainly women, who grew up in the poor areas of Brazil, and she wants to take on L'Oreal, and she's starting a new hair clinic in Harlem. These are the stories that if you tell them, it's amazing. Young kids sitting in these places today think, I can do it too.
When you think about investing in these businesses now, you talked about the return, not return on equity, but you said return on donated capital.
Yes.
What's the threshold? How do you do that, especially when you're doing it, I assume, side by side with, I don't want to say real venture capitalists, but venture capitalists who want to make a profit?
Yeah, although we hopefully get the terms better. Entrepreneurs are still getting unfair terms. We like being of, by, and for entrepreneurs. We're neutral. We don't set the valuation. We actually did a notional fund. We said, OK, what would have happened if, looking back over 15 years, we had done this type of endowment that would invest in our entrepreneurs? The return on the ROIC would have been 3x, 48% IRR. I mean, these are, for an emerging markets venture fund, that's great. The difference is that when we hopefully become profitable, we can move on to the harder places. And we can actually create these ecosystems where eventually we hope the venture capitalists come. We hope one day we're not needed in Brazil. But we need an organization, we think, that kind of creates that ecosystem in a neutral way.
Hardest country so far? What's a country you'd like to conquer?
With Google, let's do Egypt. Let's say Egypt.
I'm curious on your end, in terms of most of the things we've talked about are low-skill work. Is the goal ultimately to raise the skill level? Meaning, is that something you want to do, or is that a different business?
I think that'd be a different business. I mean, our goal is to tackle poverty. And right now, there are so many people who can read and write in English, who could do our work, but just don't have access to it. And so many companies that have this work that's just sitting there that we could do. So our first goal is to expand the number of people doing this low-skilled type work. And to Linda's earlier point, we look at a similar measure. We look at how many people were able to move over the poverty line and for how much donor capital. And what's so exciting about businesses like ours is that now you can track that. In the digital age, I can tell you, for a very limited amount of your funds, we can actually move somebody over the poverty line, and all the evidence suggests that they don't go back to it once they've had formal work and training. So our goal is to dramatically expand Samasource, and then I have a broader vision for my organization, which is to become like the Virgin of social enterprise. I think that Sama could eventually become an incubator for various other social businesses that all use technology to address problems related to poverty.
Just one interesting point that gets to your point about how we view business and capitalism. I mean, I think you're hearing today these 2 nonprofits who are using the tools of the private sector, right? And we're aiming for profits, both with our businesses, and ultimately we want to be self-sustaining, and we're generating profits, just turning it back into ourselves. But here's what businesses can learn from the nonprofit world. It's something I call psychic equity. And I think that so many times when you think that you have all these financial equity to give, you don't take the care to think about the ownership structure. When people are waking up every day, are they feeling like they're making a contribution? I think these young people, these millennials, are actually telling people they'll take a trade-off in salary, in the power they have to actually make a difference. And I think that companies...
Do you think that's true?
I think that with the millennials it is. yeah, I think they care about making an impact, and I think companies that tap into that and actually make their profits but give people the sense of ownership and psychic equity and unsilo things, I absolutely think if you want to retain young people today, you have to. I do.
We're going to be talking to some people after this who've done something like that and have some interesting stories to tell. On your side, after lunch today, we were talking before this session, and you were saying that you end up actually competing against for-profits. How does that work?
Well, it's tough, but we're in a space that's, some people call it crowdsourcing, that's now filling up with new companies that are finding ways to create marketplaces for these basic, what are called human intelligence tasks. Amazon runs one called Mechanical Turk. We used to share office space with a firm called Crowdflower, which also does what we do. So we're in a competitive industry, and actually many nonprofits are in competitive industry.
What's the most advanced thing I could come to you for right now?
Writing content. Writing content for your website. Maybe not the kind of content that you write, but.
What kind of content are you talking about?
So, captioning an image or a video. We do a lot of really short form content, so answering questions that communities online don't want to answer, maybe fact checking for news stories. So all sorts of content writing and basic tasks that are in this category of basic human intelligence work, so requiring literacy and a little human ingenuity.
Do you buy this assertion, Linda's assertion on sort of social mission in this generation? I think we're all part of the same generation. And I have to admit, I'm a little skeptical.
Wait a minute. It's not social mission of the companies. We actually did a study, and in fact, companies that are aiming for profits scale faster. I'm not saying that companies should all become Ben and Jerry's with that mission or talk about their social. In fact, people who see trade-offs, who say they're going for social profits, oftentimes have a hard time scaling. That's not what I'm saying. Psychic equity, and I think that it's about making people feel that everything they do has an impact and that your business is making a difference in the world.
I buy it, and here's why. The internet has dramatically broadened our circle of empathy. No longer is a woman in a slum in Kenya someone who doesn't deserve the basic human dignity that we can afford to provide her. And I think that as the world shrinks, more and more people who graduate from college are looking for meaning in their jobs, and they don't want to relegate meaning to weekends and after hours, nonprofit work. They want meaning to be central to what they spend the majority of their time doing. That's certainly why I started my organization. That's why we run what I call an investment banker reform program. We get a lot of consultants, not to insult any investment bankers in the room, we get a lot of people who used to work at McKinsey and Goldman and who say, I've spent my time for the last 3 years making lots of money for the man, and now I want to do something for mankind. And I just see that as a very broad trend that is shaping my industry and many others.
Can I say one more thing about your original question and about the patients? When we started out, no one believed there were any of these entrepreneurs in emerging markets. So what I used to say when people, including my parents, didn't know what I had done, I'd gone to law school and gone into retirement, they thought. And I said, what we're doing is bottling up the magic of Silicon Valley and putting it in places where there's talent, there are ideas, but there's no support. And that's what I would say. And today, I'm asked so many times on college campuses to do the inverse. I say now, I think people in Jakarta and Rio and Istanbul may believe in the American dream more than our own kids do. And people are saying, look, there's no stability. I can't become an entrepreneur. It's too scary out there. What will happen? And I think that if we can bottle up this energy, that half the Fortune 500 companies today were founded in periods of downturn. And this idea that, in fact, when the world is a bit chaotic, when you have to think in the longer term, you have to be more patient, and it's the best time to start something up, because the idea that we're creating this risk-averse generation, I think, can be overturned with examples of people in the for-profit and nonprofit worlds that are trying to make change.
On that very promising note, we're going to leave it there. Thank you to both of you, Linda and Lila. This was tremendous.